I never thought a broken doorknob and a for sale sign could define the start of one of the strangest chapters of my life. And yet, here I was, stepping into a Victorian relic in Boston, convinced that ghosts were a myth until the first night. The air smelled faintly of dust, cedar, and old parchment, as if the house itself were inhaling memories and exhaling them in whispers. I dropped my bags on the floorboards that creaked like old knees and ran a hand over the banister, worn smooth by decades of other hands, other lives. "Great choice, Max," I muttered sarcastically to myself, earning only the echo of my own voice. There was no one to answer. Of course, there wasn't. Only the house. Only him. I had read the listing 100 times. Charming, affordable Victorian home in the heart of Boston. Needs TLC. Ideal for creatives. What it didn't say was that the previous occupant, a young musician named Elijah, had disappeared under circumstances that the town still whispered about. Some said he had died of heartbreak. Others said he simply vanished into the night, leaving nothing but music and shadows. I wasn't a ghost hunter, nor was I one to believe in spirits. But when I lay down that first night, something warm and impossibly intimate pressed against me. A weight that felt like a body, a heartbeat, a sigh that brushed my ear with the intimacy of someone who had been waiting for me. I jolted upright, the cold sweat sticking to my shirt, and the room was empty, just the moonlight slicing through the blinds. I laughed nervously, shaking my head. "Okay, Max, maybe you do need therapy." But night after night, it happened again. Not menacing, not frightening, but achingly close, as if someone who had never known me before had decided that they could not live or linger without my presence. His touch was tentative, almost shy, yet profoundly intimate, curling around my shoulders, tugging at my spine with a longing that pierced the hollows of loneliness I had carried for years. I began leaving a notebook on the nightstand, scribbling my thoughts and fears, and often found the pages turned, small phrases added, almost like he was speaking to me in the only way he could, through the quiet intimacy of unseen gestures. Then came the music. Soft, tentative piano notes drifting from the empty parlor, each chord like a question, each melody a confession. And I realized, as my pulse quickened in the dim light, that the house was alive with him. Elijah, the musician who had loved too deeply, perhaps too recklessly, now inhabiting the walls like a memory that refused to fade. Days blurred into nights. I walked through the narrow streets of Boston, feeling the hum of life outside while the house held its secret inside. Every passerby with a guitar case, every busker with a haunting tune, reminded me of him, but only inside those walls did the true intimacy exist. He was tentative in the daylight, present only as a flicker in the corner of my vision, a shadow too quick to grasp, but at night, he claimed the space around me, wrapping around my dreams, pressing against me with a closeness I had only ever imagined. It wasn't frightening, at least not in the conventional sense. It was as if the universe had conspired to teach me about touch, about warmth, about belonging, through a presence that was technically impossible. I started talking to him, whispering in the dark, and sometimes it felt like he responded with sighs, or the barely there tremor of breath across my skin. One evening, I made the mistake of blessing off following the sound of the piano. It led me to the parlor where the light of a single candle flickered against polished wood and sheet music scattered across the floor. I could almost see him in the air, fingers ghosting over keys that had not felt human hands in decades. "Why are you here?" I could almost see his eyes, the way they would narrow in concentration, the curve of a shy smile, though the shape remained elusive, blurred in moonlight and memory. "Because you needed someone," came the reply, almost a thought, almost a memory. "Because you are alive," and I had to feel it again. My chest tightened. The idea that a soul could linger, searching for warmth, seeking touch, haunted me, but in the most beautiful way. And then I realized he wasn't asking for me to save him. He was asking for permission to love me through the only means he could. The nights became a delicate dance. I would lie awake, sometimes laughing at the absurdity, sometimes crying because the intimacy was so raw, so deeply human, despite the impossibility. He pressed closer when my dreams turned lonely, left the faintest traces of warmth against my skin, and sometimes, just sometimes, I could hear him humming a tune I didn't know but had always needed to hear. I wanted to tell someone, anyone, but how could I? A roommate? My mother? The world outside would laugh or shake their head at me, dismiss me as tired or lonely or delusional. And yet, inside this crumbling Victorian shell, I felt an honesty I had never known. Every touch, every sound, every heartbeat that was not mine made me feel real. Boston outside the windows carried on obliviously. Cars honked, pedestrians scurried, and the city pulsed with life, but inside, time was irrelevant. He existed in my space, in my mind, in the warmth of a hand that had never been meant to belong to me. The house became a sanctuary. I cleaned the dust, repaired the creaking steps, and each improvement seemed to awaken him further, his presence swelling with gratitude that could only be felt, never seen. And slowly, I began to understand him not just as a ghost, but as a person who had loved fully, deeply, painfully, and who had found a way to extend that love into the world that had moved on without him. Sometimes I imagined him in daylight, tall, lean, hair falling over eyes that could both charm and wound. A musician with the sort of hands that could coax life from strings and keys alike. And at night, when he embraced me, it was as if the daylight vision merged with the ethereal presence, and I felt a love that was almost unfair in its intensity. And yet, for all the beauty there was fear. Fear that one day he would vanish, leaving only silence and the faintest trace of scent, that the house would remember him without me, and that I would be alone once more. Each night was a gamble, a thrill, a heartbreak and a delight all at once. Max, I told myself, you have stumbled into a story that no one else will understand. You have fallen for a ghost or perhaps a memory, or perhaps something more divine. But for the first time in years, I felt something that mattered. Something real. Something I would fight to protect, even if it was only visible in moonlight and imagination. And so, night after night, Boston slept unaware, the streets alive with mundane concerns, while I lay awake, feeling the brush of a hand that was not my own but belonged to me in ways the world could never comprehend. The following morning, sunlight spilled reluctantly through the curtains, brushing the dust motes that danced lazily in the air. I sat on the edge of my bed, tracing the worn floorboards with my fingers, feeling the residual warmth of his touch lingering as though the night had never ended. My heart ached with a strange combination of longing and joy, a contradiction I had grown used to in just a few days. Breakfast felt like a performance, the mundane act of pouring cereal into a bowl somehow infused with tension. I spoke to the empty room, half expecting a ghostly whisper to answer me, half hoping the reality of silence would ground me in the world outside. But he was already present, somewhere between the shadows of the wallpaper and the faint creak of the steps, invisible yet palpable. Work provided a cruel contrast. The bustling offices of downtown Boston were a cacophony of human life that I was now painfully aware I could never fully relate to. Colleagues chatted about coffee, deadlines, and banal complaints, while I thought about invisible hands brushing mine under the sheets, about the soft strains of piano notes resonating in the walls behind me. Each phone call, each email, felt heavier, distant, irrelevant, as though my body had returned to the world but my soul had not. By the time evening arrived, I was jittery with anticipation. My apartment, our apartment, though he did not exist in a conventional sense, called to me. I hurried home, my coat flapping behind me, weaving through Boston's narrow streets, past brick buildings that smelled of history and rain. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of the harbor and the tang of industry. But all of that paled in comparison to the atmosphere inside the house. Warm, alive, and filled with the intangible presence of Elijah. I kicked off my shoes at the door and stood in the parlor, listening. The faintest notes drifted from the piano, cautious, hesitant, as though he too was testing the limits of what was permissible between our worlds. "You're late," I whispered with a laugh, my voice trembling with excitement and nervousness. A warmth brushed my shoulder, soft and fleeting, almost like a question. I shivered. "I'm here now," I added, pressing my palm against the piano, feeling the coldness of the wood, imagining it warm under his fingers. Night after night, this became our routine. He would play, I would watch or listen, and somehow, in that quiet, intangible way, we spoke. Words were often unnecessary. Touch was not always required. The mere presence, the knowing, the silent intimacy, filled the voids in both our hearts. And yet, a part of me remained painfully aware that this was not a conventional relationship. There would be no holding hands in public, no coffee dates in crowded cafes, no laughter spilling over outside walls that respected the supernatural. Despite that, the closeness was overwhelming. One night, as I lay on the bed, I felt him press closer than usual, almost draping himself over me as though he could collapse into my very being. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, could only feel. And in that stillness, I imagined what it would be like if he could exist in the sunlight, if he could leave the house with me and walk through the city streets, our fingers entwined, our laughter echoing off brick and glass. But mornings always came. Light broke through the blinds, the warmth of his presence faded, and I was left with the phantom ache of absence. I began keeping a journal, recording every sensation, every whisper, every note that seemed to speak directly to my soul. I wrote of longing, of love, of impossibility, and for the first time, I realized that I was falling in love with a ghost, not metaphorically, not poetically but literally. My heart betrayed logic. My mind struggled against belief. My soul surrendered entirely. One evening, a storm rolled over Boston. Rain streaked the windows in chaotic lines, lightning briefly illuminating the shadowed corners of the parlor. I was curled on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the piano, waiting. The music came, hesitant at first, then bolder, louder, desperate. The notes struck me like a revelation, and I realized that he too felt the storm, not as we did, of course, but as a memory, as an echo, as a longing that matched my own. The intensity of it made me weep silently, the tears sliding down my cheeks unnoticed, unobserved by any human eyes. And then he pressed closer. I felt his weight, his warmth, the contour of a shoulder against mine, the curve of a jawline that existed only in imagination yet was undeniably present in the sensation. "Don't go," I whispered, my voice breaking. He did not answer with words. His hand brushed me, a touch that defied reality, a gesture that carried a lifetime of unspoken love. And I realized something profound. I didn't need him to exist in the daylight to be whole. I didn't need validation from the outside world to love him. Our bond, unconventional, impossible, yet beautiful beyond measure, was enough. The storm passed, leaving the world outside soaked and glimmering under streetlights reflecting on puddles. I stayed awake long after, listening to the residual music, feeling the lingering presence of his warmth like a heartbeat pressed into the mattress beside me. Sleep eventually came, reluctant and shallow, and I dreamed of sunlight touching his face, of fingers entwined, of laughter spilling freely in open air. Days turned into weeks. I grew more comfortable with the impossible, integrating his presence into the rhythm of my life. Friends began noticing a subtle change in me. A lightness, an animation, a sparkle in my eyes that hadn't been there before. I never explained why. They would have thought me insane. And perhaps I was in the eyes of society. But the depth of intimacy I felt, the sheer joy of connection, surpassed any social convention or rational expectation. One afternoon, I brought an old camera from my collection and set it up in the parlor. A wide-angle lens captured the room in all its worn glory, the chipped molding, the faded wallpaper, the streaked sunlight filtering through heavy curtains. I stood where I always did, pretending to frame an empty room, but I imagined him there, smiling, leaning slightly into me as if the camera could somehow capture not just an image but a presence, a soul, a love that existed beyond the physical plane. And in that imagined frame I saw it, the intimacy, the longing, the quiet declarations of love that needed no words. The camera could not record him, not truly, but in that moment, I felt as if it understood. As if it honored the invisible bond that defied reason, defied mortality, and yet was more tangible than anything I had ever known. I began playing his compositions on the piano, tracing the notes with careful fingers, imagining him sitting beside me, correcting mistakes with a soft laugh, coaxing out melodies that spoke of a past he had lived and a present we shared. Our nights became a symphony of shared existence. Touch, music, whispered secrets, and laughter that echoed in a house designed for memories, haunted only by the gentlest of presences. One night, weeks later, I dared to speak a truth aloud. I love you, Elijah, even if you aren't real. The room shifted. A warmth enveloped me, pressing against my chest, and the faintest vibration seemed to resonate in response. A note, clear and ringing, sounded from the piano. I felt him closer than ever, his presence radiating, almost tangible. And in that moment, I knew he felt the same. Love transcended form, reality, and societal expectation. It existed here, in this ancient house, in the quiet intimacy we had carved out from the edges of the world. Boston outside remained oblivious, indifferent, as life surged on. But within the walls of that crumbling Victorian home, two hearts, one visible and one ethereal, had found a universe of their own. Pain, longing, and fear existed only to amplify the joy, and every night, every note, every whispered brush of presence reaffirmed the truth. Connection is not bound by flesh alone. And slowly, over the following weeks, I realized that my loneliness, my fears, my disbelief in the extraordinary, had all been a prelude. The house had waited for me, the city had whispered my name through the wind, and the universe had conspired to place me in the path of a soul that would teach me the most human lesson of all. To love, fully, regardless of circumstance, form, or expectation. We were together in a way no one could see, a love story written in touches, melodies, and the silence between words. And perhaps in a world that demanded explanation, that sought to define and categorize, that connection was more beautiful precisely because it could not be measured, contained, or understood. Autumn arrived in Boston, painting the streets with hues of amber and crimson, and the wind carried a chill that made the city feel alive with whispered secrets. I walked along the narrow sidewalks, my coat pulled tight, my mind elsewhere in him, on the warmth that waited behind the Victorian walls. Even as the city buzzed around me, I felt a profound solitude. The world moved, but I existed in a bubble where only the house and his presence mattered. I had tried, half-heartedly, to reconnect with friends, to explain the strange joy I had found. But how could I? Words failed utterly. How do you explain a love that cannot exist outside walls, outside moonlight, outside the fragile boundary between life and memory? They would laugh, shake their heads, and think I had lost my mind. And perhaps I had. But the ache of missing him when I left the house made any attempt at normal conversation impossible. One evening, a letter arrived, typed on old stationery, its edges curling slightly with age. The envelope bore no return address, only a seal with an ornate musical note. I hesitated, hands trembling, before opening it. The words inside were brief but precise. You are not alone, but the world will not understand. Protect what you love. I held the paper to my chest, breath catching. My first instinct was fear someone knew about him, about us, but there was no signature, no human handwriting, only a voice carried in ink. And yet, in some inexplicable way, I felt reassured. Not just by the warning, but by the recognition that our bond was extraordinary enough to be acknowledged beyond the ordinary. That night, as I settled in, the house seemed quieter. The piano notes were hesitant, almost reluctant, as though he sensed the tension in my heart. I pressed my fingers to the keys, trying to coax out a melody we could share, and felt him lean into me, the warmth of his presence anchoring me against an unspoken fear. Are you afraid? I whispered, not knowing if the words reached him, or if he could even answer in the way I hoped. A soft, almost imperceptible sigh. His presence tightened around me, a hug pressed into my chest, conveying more than words ever could. I realized then that the depth of intimacy we shared was not bound by visibility, not constrained by expectation. Every touch, every ghostly brush of air, every vibration in the piano carried a meaning more profound than physical interaction. But life outside the house encroached inevitably. One afternoon, I ran into an acquaintance from work, Daniel, in a cafe. He was the sort of man who loved to tease, to push boundaries, and his eyes sparkled with curiosity that felt intrusive. "So, Max," he said, a smirk curling his lips, "you've been distant lately. Any new love interest? Someone special in your life?" My stomach twisted. How could I explain him? "Not exactly," I muttered, avoiding eye contact. "Ah," he replied knowingly, leaning closer. "Secrets, huh? Well, secrets make life interesting. Just be careful." The words hung in the air like a threat disguised as advice. I returned home that evening, tension coiling in my chest. Inside, the house was warm, the faint scent of cedar and parchment welcoming me. And there he was, Elijah, pressing against me, reminding me that the only validation I truly needed existed here. But fear gnawed at me. What if someone discovered him? What if someone tried to erase him, to prove to the world that I had imagined our love? My chest ached with a premonition I couldn't name. Weeks passed, and my routine deepened. Daylight spent in the mundane world, nights steeped in ethereal intimacy. But the tension between reality and impossibility was sharpening. Elijah seemed aware of it too, his presence sometimes hesitant, almost fragile. He no longer pressed as boldly as before, perhaps sensing my doubts, or maybe protecting himself from the fragility of human attachment. One particularly stormy night, the wind howled through the cracks in the house, rattling the windows like an uninvited visitor. I lay in bed, tracing the outlines of the old wallpaper, feeling the weight of his absence more acutely than ever. I called his name aloud, my voice trembling with desperation. And then he was there, not pressing, not enveloping, but hovering, a faint presence that vibrated against the mattress beside me. "I'm here," I whispered. "I don't care what anyone else thinks. I love you." The air thickened, charged with unspoken emotion. The room seemed to pulse with him, his presence more tangible than ever, as though my declaration had strengthened the bridge between our worlds. And yet, the storm outside reminded me of the fragility of this bond. Life, reality, and society were forces we could not escape. In the following days, I noticed small changes. Objects in the house shifted slightly, notes left open on the piano. His presence felt both more assertive and more cautious. It was as if he too understood that love alone could not shield us from the world's gaze, from the intrusion of human curiosity or disbelief. Then came the night that changed everything. I had stayed late in the city, working on a project for a client, and arrived home exhausted. The house was unnervingly silent. The faint warmth I expected was absent, and an unfamiliar chill lingered in the air. I called his name, pacing the parlor, heart pounding. A shadow moved across the wall, flickering under the candlelight. My breath caught. "Elijah," I whispered. The presence returned, tentative, hesitant, but different. There was urgency, a strain in the vibration of the air. I felt a pulse of energy, almost like fear, almost like pleading. My heart ached in a way that mirrored the intensity of the previous nights but magnified. Something was wrong. Over the next hours, I pieced it together in fragments. A pressure from beyond the walls, a faint sense of intrusion, as though forces outside wanted to claim him, to erase him from existence. My love, the intangible warmth I had grown dependent upon, was threatened. Panic clawed at me, yet I could do nothing except hold the house in my heart, hoping, praying that my devotion could somehow shield him. The nights that followed were a delicate battle of presence and protection. I learned to anticipate, to guard the space we shared, to reinforce the bond with intention and affection. Each night, I whispered words of love, courage, and reassurance. Each night, he responded, pressing closer, vibrating with the certainty that our connection could survive the world's disregard. And slowly, as winter approached, the storm outside subsided. Elijah's presence grew more confident, more tangible, and the fear that had haunted us began to recede. We had weathered the invisible threat, emerging with a bond strengthened by adversity. One snowy evening, I lit candles across the parlor, their warm light reflecting off the polished keys of the piano. I played a melody he had composed, one I had learned by heart, and felt him lean into me, not as a ghost, but as a partner in the quiet symphony of our existence. "Do you feel it?" I whispered, tears sliding down my cheeks. "Do you feel how real this is?" The answer was in the warmth that enveloped me, in the gentle tremor against my skin, in the sigh that seemed to echo from the very walls. I realized that love, in its purest form, is not bound by visibility, by human conventions, or even by life itself. It is a force that bends reality, a presence that transforms loneliness into intimacy, fear into courage, absence into fulfillment. We spent the night in silence, communicating in ways that defied words, defied the limitations of form. The world outside continued its rhythm, but inside the house, time had paused. There was only us, two souls, intertwined beyond logic, beyond expectation, beyond mortality. By the time spring returned, carrying with it the scent of renewal and rain-washed streets, our bond had transformed into something extraordinary. I could feel him with me even in daylight, in fleeting moments. A brush of warmth against my arm, a faint scent of cedar in the breeze, a vibration of energy that reminded me he was near. And then I understood the final truth. Happiness does not require validation, acceptance, or comprehension from the outside world. Happiness, true and profound, exists in the authenticity of connection, in the willingness to love fully, regardless of circumstance. "Max," I whispered one evening as he pressed closer, "I don't care if anyone understands. I just want Thysis." And he responded in the only way he could, a presence so intimate and undeniable that I felt the very essence of love radiating through me. In that moment, I knew we were free not from the world, not from reality, but free in the only way that truly mattered, free to love, to exist, to belong to one another in a universe that often refuses to recognize miracles. Boston continued around us, a city alive with the mundane, the ordinary, the visible. But inside the crumbling Victorian house, two hearts, one corporeal, one ethereal, had found eternity in the quiet, intimate space we had carved together. And in that eternity, love was infinite, unbound, and infinitely beautiful. Spring deepened into a warm, gentle season, washing Boston in soft light and the scent of blooming flowers. The city thrummed with life outside the walls of the Victorian house, but inside, the air was still and sacred, filled with the hum of the past, the present, and our shared eternity. I walked through the parlor, my fingers brushing over the piano keys that had become the conduit of our souls. Each note carried him closer, each chord a declaration. We had learned to communicate without words, to feel the cadence of each other's presence. I could sense his mood, his thoughts, even his hesitations, as clearly as I could see my own reflection in the windows that overlooked the snow-melted streets. And one afternoon, I finally realized that I didn't merely tolerate his ethereal existence. I cherished it, depended on it, and would protect it at all costs. It was on such a spring day that the world intruded again, in the most unexpected way. I had invited a local historian to document the house for a small Boston heritage project. He was polite, curious, and meticulous, snapping photos, jotting notes, and asking questions about previous occupants. I guided him through the rooms, masking my apprehension, praying he would sense nothing unusual. The historian paused by the piano. Beautiful instrument. Must have belonged to someone quite talented. I smiled tightly. Yes, the previous owner. He left quite an impression. Something stirred behind me, a warmth brushing my shoulder. I froze, my heart leaping at the familiar sensation. Not a shadow, not a hallucination. Him. I swallowed, aware that the historian could not see or feel him. But in that intimate pressure, I felt the urgency of our connection. He was here, alive in the ways that mattered. After the historian left, I exhaled, feeling the tension melt. I walked to the piano, placing my hands over the keys. I was afraid, I whispered. Afraid I couldn't protect you. A soft vibration brushed my back, a reassuring presence. Almost as if he answered, "You've been enough. Always enough." Those words the feeling of them brought tears to my eyes. All the months of fear, longing, doubt, and love culminated in that simple affirmation. I realized then that our bond was not fragile. It had survived intrusion, skepticism, even the terrifying idea of disappearance. It was indestructible, rooted in mutual care and understanding. Night fell, as it always did, but it no longer carried tension. He pressed closer, not as a ghost seeking warmth, but as a partner who had chosen to share existence in a way that only we could comprehend. I traced his presence with gentle fingers, marveling at how a soul unseen could feel more tangible than any human touch I had known. Then came an idea, perhaps audacious, perhaps foolish but necessary. If our love existed beyond reason, why should it remain confined within walls? I gathered candles, the camera, and music sheets we had accumulated over months. My plan was simple: capture him in the ways the world could perceive, even if indirectly. A wide-angle lens, soft candlelight, and the melodies he had composed might convey his essence, if not his form. I set up the camera in the parlor, careful to frame the room as he often did in my imagination. I played his compositions, my fingers dancing over the keys, letting the music echo through the house. He leaned closer, pressing against my side, vibrating in perfect rhythm with the notes. The camera could not capture him fully, but the movement of the hands, the shadows cast by the candlelight, the energy in the room, it all bore witness to him, to us, to love that transcended form. For the first time, I felt bold. I spoke aloud, words that had never been voiced outside the house. "Elijah, we can share this. Even if no one else can see you, even if no one understands. I want them to know you exist in every note, every shadow, every breath we take together." The presence pressed into me, a vibration of emotion that nearly brought me to my knees. I felt him smile, the warmth of acknowledgement radiating through the air. That night, for the first time, our love was not just hidden in shadows, it had a tangible testament, a record of our existence in the world, even if only faintly. Weeks passed, and the seasons shifted, but nothing could diminish the intimacy we had cultivated. I grew bolder in my daily life, smiling more, laughing more, aware that he was always near. Friends noticed the change, the glow, and while they could not comprehend its source, I no longer cared. I was whole. I was loved. And love, in its purest form, required no witnesses. One evening, a strange but welcome sensation occurred. I had left the window open to catch the scent of lilacs from the street below. A faint breeze carried a melody I didn't recognize, yet it was his. Not a memory, not a recording, but a live manifestation of his presence outside the house, beyond the confines of walls and wood. I closed my eyes, inhaling deeply, and felt him swirl around me like a dance of wind and warmth. For the first time, I realized that our love was not merely confined, it had grown. It had adapted. It had learned to exist beyond the house itself. From that moment, I understood something vital. Fear had no place in love this extraordinary. To love a ghost, to love someone beyond the reach of reason, was to embrace the unknown, to celebrate existence in all its forms. Every night we spent together, every note, every touch, every intimate vibration, was a triumph of devotion over limitation. Winter had once threatened to isolate us. Society had once threatened to dismiss us. And yet here we were, thriving in a connection no one could erase. I walked through the house, hand in hand, or rather, hand in presence with Elijah, my heart swelling with gratitude. The creaking floors, the faded wallpaper, the flickering candlelight, they all bore witness to our love story. A story untraditional, unrecognized by the world, yet perfectly valid in the universe that truly mattered, the one we shared. And then came the night I realized that our journey, strange and miraculous, had reached its own kind of perfection. I lay on the bed, the faint scent of cedar and parchment filling the air. He pressed closer, as always, and I whispered the words I had carried for months. "I am yours, always." In life, in memory, in every breath we share. He responded with a presence so immediate, so tender, that I could feel every nuance of emotion vibrating against my skin. Our hearts one visible, one ethereal beat in harmony, creating a rhythm that transcended flesh, form, and even mortality. In that moment, I understood that love had no boundaries. It required no recognition, no comprehension, no justification. It simply existed. Spring blossomed fully, and for the first time, I felt a quiet confidence in the world outside. I walked through Boston streets, aware of its chaos, its beauty, its indifference. But inside me, inside the house, inside our shared connection, there was peace. We had survived fear, loneliness, skepticism, and intrusion. We had proven that love could thrive even in the most improbable circumstances. I looked at the piano, now polished and gleaming in the sunlight. Music sheets scattered across the floor carried our story in notes, in melodies, in chords that echoed the intimacy, longing, and triumph we had lived. Every night we had spent together, every moment of fear, every tremor of desire and affection, had culminated in a presence that was unbreakable. And I finally spoke aloud, to the world that would never hear me, to the soul that had become my life. We are eternal. In each note, in every shadow, in every heartbeat, we exist together. Always. The house, the city, the universe seemed to breathe with me, acknowledging the truth that had taken months to fully realize. Love, when authentic, transcends reason, form, and even death. It is not confined by human expectation, nor can it be erased by disbelief. It is alive, as real as the warmth pressed against your chest, as tangible as the notes that linger long after the piano falls silent. And in the quiet, intimate moments that followed, as the sun set over Boston, spilling golden light through the windows, I felt the final truth of our journey. Happiness is not found in recognition, not in the mundane milestones of life. Happiness is found in connection, in devotion, in the courage to love wholly, against all odds, beyond all logic. I pressed closer to him, feeling the warmth, the presence, the undeniable reality of our love. "I love you, Elijah," I whispered, "and I will keep loving you, no matter what." He responded, not with words, but with everything a soul could offer: warmth, energy, music, and the most intimate embrace. And in that embrace, I understood that we had reached the ultimate harmonia life, a love, a bond that was unshakable, unending, and utterly beautiful. The Victorian house stood quietly in Boston, its walls bearing witness to a love story that no one could see but everyone could feel in the music, in the shadows, in the tender traces left behind. And within it, two hearts, one mortal, one ethereal, had discovered the extraordinary truth that love, in its purest, most profound form, transcends everything. We were together, finally, perfectly, eternally. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.